Have you ever wondered why, even when surrounded by people, you feel profoundly alone? Why do your conversations seem to float on the surface while your mind dives into depths that few want to explore? There is a peculiar loneliness that accompanies those who see life with an almost cruel clarity, a lucidity that cuts through the comfortable illusions that most prefer to embrace. Albert Camus knew this. He lived the experience of being a stranger in his own world, of possessing such a keen awareness that it isolated him from the human connections he so desired. Today we will explore the signs that you may be too lucid to have many friends, and how this, paradoxically, can be both your greatest strength and your deepest loneliness. Lucidity is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it offers us the ability to see through social masks, to understand hidden motivations, to question established truths. On the other, it puts us in the uncomfortable position of eternal vigilance, always aware of human contradictions, always alert to the hypocrisies that permeate our interactions. Camus described this condition as that of the absurd man, one who awakens to the reality that life has no intrinsic meaning, but who must still live, must find ways to create connections in a fundamentally indifferent universe. The first sign of this excessive lucidity manifests itself in your inability to engage fully in superficial conversations. While others enthusiastically discuss the latest reality show, fashion trends, or mundane everyday events, you find yourself mentally absent, observing social dynamics like an anthropologist studying a distant tribe. It's not that you consider yourself superior. On the contrary, there is a deep melancholy in recognizing that these interactions, however genuine they may be for others, simply fail to touch the deepest layers of your human experience. You participate, smile, and nod at the appropriate moments, but a part of you remains eternally on the outside, observing through the glass of this social normality that seems so natural to others. This disconnect does not stem from contempt, but from a keen awareness of the limitations inherent in human communication. You understand that each person lives in their own subjective universe, built by their unique experiences, traumas, hopes, and fears. When someone shares an experience, you not only hear the words, but you perceive the unspoken layers, the repressed emotions, the hidden meanings that even the speaker themselves does not fully recognize. This ability to read deeply, which could be a gift for empathy, becomes a barrier when you realize that reciprocity is rare. Few have the willingness or ability to dive into the turbulent waters of existence with the same intensity as you. The second sign emerges in your relationship with social conventions and collective expectations. You observe social rituals, family traditions, professional norms, and constantly question their purpose and relevance. Not in a rebellious or destructive way, but with a genuine curiosity about why certain things are accepted without question. This tendency to constantly question, this need to examine the philosophical basis of our everyday actions, can be deeply uncomfortable for those who find security in conformity. When you ask why we follow certain traditions, why we accept certain hierarchies, why we submit to expectations that may not make sense in our current context, many people interpret this as a threat to the stability of their conceptual world. Camus emphasized that the absurd man does not reject society out of contempt, but because he recognizes the arbitrariness of many of its constructs. This does not mean living in total isolation, but rather maintaining a critical distance that allows for a more honest assessment of our choices and commitments. This stance, while intellectually honest, can be socially isolating. Most people prefer the comfortable certainty of established norms to the unease that comes with constant questioning. The third sign reveals itself in your unsettling ability to see through human motivations with almost surgical clarity. You notice when someone is trying to impress, when they are hiding insecurities behind a facade of confidence, when they are seeking validation through specific behaviors. This perception is not accompanied by moral judgment, but rather by a melancholic understanding of the complexity and fragility of the human condition. You recognize these patterns because you have observed them in yourself, because you have gone through your own journey of recognizing your own masks and hidden motivations. This emotional transparency can be deeply uncomfortable for others. People carefully construct their social identities, choosing which aspects of themselves to reveal and which to keep hidden. When they realize that you see through these constructs, they may feel exposed in a way they did not choose. It's not that you use this insight in a manipulative or cruel way, but your mere presence becomes a reminder of the artificiality of many social interactions. As a result, some may prefer to keep their distance, opting for relationships where they can keep their protective layers intact. There is a tragic beauty in this ability to see clearly. On the one hand, it allows for authentic and deep connections with those who are also willing to embrace this vulnerability. On the other hand, it creates a natural barrier with those who are not yet ready or willing to confront the harshest realities of human existence. Camus wrote extensively about this dilemma of the conscious individual, caught between the desire for human connection and the inability to be satisfied with superficial interactions. Now allow me to ask a question that may reveal a lot about your own experience. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own social circle, observing dynamics that everyone else seems to accept naturally? Leave your answer in the comments. Share your experience of lucidity and loneliness. Sometimes recognizing that we are not alone in this experience can be the first step toward finding our tribe, those who also navigate these deep waters of human consciousness. Your honesty may be exactly what someone needs to hear today to feel less isolated in their own journey of awakening. The fourth sign manifests itself in your complex relationship with the traditional concept of happiness. You observe people pursuing goals that society defines as sources of fulfillment. Professional success, idealized romantic relationships, accumulation of material goods, social recognition, and you perceive the ephemeral and often illusory nature of these achievements. It is not cynicism that drives you, but a deep understanding that happiness, as it is generally conceived, is often an escape from the fundamental realities of human existence. You recognize that life includes suffering, uncertainty, loss, and death as intrinsic elements, not as obstacles to be overcome in the pursuit of a perpetual state of contentment. This perspective can be deeply unsettling for those who have invested heavily in the narrative of happiness as the ultimate goal in life. When you express contentment with simple moments, when you find meaning in experiences that others would consider ordinary or even dreary, when you demonstrate inner peace that does not depend on ideal external circumstances, you inadvertently challenge the foundations upon which others have built their life aspirations. Your mere existence becomes a reminder that it is possible to live fully without completely adhering to the dominant cultural script about what constitutes a well-lived life. Camus distinguished between happiness and joie de vivre. Happiness, in his view, was often a social construct, an external goal imposed on us that distances us from our authentic experience. The joy of living, on the other hand, emerged from the complete acceptance of our condition, including its darkest aspects. It is the ability to embrace life in its entirety, finding beauty even in its fundamental absurdity. This distinction resonates deeply with those who have developed a lucidity that goes beyond conventional definitions of well-being. You may notice that your conversations tend to delve into territory that others consider heavy or unnecessarily complex. While others seek lightness and distraction, you feel genuinely energized by discussions about the meaning of existence, the nature of consciousness, the moral implications of our everyday choices, or the melancholic beauty of impermanence. This does not mean that you are constantly gloomy or depressed, but rather that you find depth and richness in topics that others prefer to avoid. This preference can create a natural disconnect in many social interactions, where you find yourself constantly moderating your own depth to suit the lighter tone that others prefer to maintain. The fifth and perhaps most isolating sign is your ability to remain comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity in a world that desperately seeks definitive answers and comforting certainties. You have developed a tolerance, perhaps even an appreciation, for the paradoxical nature of human existence. You can embrace contradictions without the urgent need to resolve them, find beauty in complexity that cannot be simplified, and keep questions open without the anxiety of prematurely closing deep philosophical debates. This ability to live comfortably with unanswered questions is rare and can be deeply unsettling to those who rely on rigid belief systems to navigate life. Many people build their identities and relationships around shared certainties, religious beliefs, political ideologies, cultural values, or well-defined philosophies of life. Your ability to question these certainties, to explore their limitations and internal contradictions, to remain open to multiple and often conflicting perspectives, can be interpreted as a threat to group cohesion. It is not that you completely reject these structures of meaning, but you see them as fallible human constructs, useful in certain contexts, but not necessarily bearers of absolute truth. Camus called this living in absurdity, recognizing both our human need for meaning and the impossibility of finding definitive answers to the fundamental questions of existence. This position requires considerable inner strength, as it means letting go of the conceptual anchors that offer psychological security to most people. It is a form of intellectual and emotional courage that few are willing or prepared to develop. This existential lucidity can make you feel like a perpetual translator, constantly interpreting between different worlds of meaning without belonging completely to any of them. You understand the emotional and conceptual languages of different groups, but you always keep a part of yourself in reserve, observing and analyzing rather than giving yourself over completely to the group experience. This is not coldness or emotional detachment, but rather a particular form of presence that combines genuine involvement with critical awareness. The loneliness that accompanies this lucidity is not simply the absence of company, but a more subtle form of existential isolation. You may be surrounded by people who appreciate and even admire you for your depth and insight, yet still feel that an essential part of your experience remains incommunicable. It is the loneliness of carrying insights that cannot be easily shared, of seeing connections and patterns that others do not perceive, of living with an intensity of awareness that can be both a gift and a burden. But there is also a unique beauty in this position. Camus found in the figure of Sisyphus a powerful metaphor for the human condition. Condemned by the gods to push a rock up a mountain for all eternity, Sisyphus represents all of us in our constant struggle against the apparent meaninglessness of existence. But Camus suggests that we should imagine Sisyphus happy, not despite his condition, but because he has found meaning in the very act of living, of continuing, of affirming his humanity in the face of absurdity. This is the particular joy of those who have developed existential lucidity, the ability to find depth and even contentment in an existence they recognize as fundamentally without guarantees or predetermined meanings. Your lucidity allows for experiences of beauty and connection that are inaccessible to those who remain on the surface of human experience. You can find deep meaning in moments that others would consider trivial, an honest conversation about fears and hopes, a shared moment of silence that communicates more than words, observing nature that reveals something about the human condition, or reading a text that articulates experiences you thought were uniquely yours. If you've made it this far and recognized aspects of your own experience in this description, consider subscribing to the channel. Not as another addition to your entertainment list, but as a space where these deep reflections are not only welcome but celebrated. Here, we explore together the questions that really matter, creating a community of those who prefer depth to superficiality, authenticity to empty conventions. Existential lucidity is not a condition to be cured, but a particular way of being human that brings both unique challenges and extraordinary rewards. Recognizing these signs in yourself is not a diagnosis of perpetual isolation, but an invitation to seek more authentic and meaningful connections. There is a tribe for those who live with this intensity of awareness, people who also navigate between the need for human connection and the integrity of a perspective that refuses to compromise with comforting simplifications. The path is not to abandon the search for relationships, but rather to refine your search, to find those who can meet you at that level of depth. These connections may be fewer in number, but they are often richer and more lasting than relationships based on superficial compatibilities. When you find someone who not only tolerates but appreciates your ability to see clearly, who shares your comfort with ambiguity and complexity, who finds beauty in brutal honesty about the human condition, you discover that quality can more than compensate for quantity in human relationships. Camus taught us that the response to absurdity is neither despair nor escape, but revolt. Not violent or destructive revolt, but a courageous affirmation of our humanity despite the apparent universal lack of meaning. For those who are too lucid to have many friends, rebellion can mean continuing to seek authentic connection, continuing to offer your unique perspective to the world, continuing to live with integrity even when it means accepting a certain degree of existential loneliness. It is choosing honesty over popularity, depth over ease, authenticity over universal acceptance. And in that choice, paradoxically, you may discover not only peace with yourself, but also the path to the deepest and most meaningful connections that human experience can offer. Lucidity is not a curse, but a particular form of courage that, once fully embraced, becomes one of the most beautiful expressions of what it means to be truly human.